It's said that great men aren't born, they are forged. The ultimate weapon tempered in the flames of conflict, honed to perfection. Sharp, efficient, deadly. And for one man, that fire burned just a little bit hotter, forging him into one of the deadliest men the wasteland has ever seen, forging him into a legend. This is the tale of the Commonwealth's most dangerous mercenary. Now, dear legionaries, welcome to the wasteland. Many years ago, in a land to the far west, a little boy was born amidst the haunting glow of the wasteland. Having the fortune of an upbringing in a settlement, he was raised in relative safety from the threats that plagued the wastes from outside his town's walls. But the dangers that lurk outside are not the only dangers a young man needs to be wary of. Sadly, the dangers that plagued this young man came from those he loved most, those he depended on. Growing up, the domestic environment he found himself in was tumultuous at the best of times. Seemingly an only child, it was his parents' actions at the root of this chaos. It's unclear how they behaved when he was born, whether they were peaceful and loving, having simply been driven to this in their later life, or if they were always the way he remembers them: aggressive, cynical, cold. In any case, his parents would come to play a pivotal role in shaping the man we see before us today. Conrad's family was largely dependent on his father to provide for them, but his father wasn't very consistent or successful at doing so, leading the family to a life of impoverishment. While they had some basics covered, a roof, clothes, radio, and magazines, they lacked some crucial elements to their Maslow's hierarchy. Elements like stability, safety, and sense of connection. Conrad's father was an alcoholic, and a severe one at that. Not only this, he was a frequent aggressor, choosing to take it out on those he should have been protecting, the defenseless whose entire lives depended on him. His family found themselves at war with the very man who was supposed to be keeping them safe. Conrad had learned from an early age that he would need to become self-sufficient if he wanted to survive in this world, a belief that was imposed by his mother, but not without warrant, as they lived with the perfect example of why. An example that the young man would be reminded of every day, the very second he opened his eyes. While the memories of his mother are vague and painful, he does recall her loving nature, her cynicism, her wisdom, and most of all, her willingness to protect him from his father, even if it meant taking a few extra licks in doing so. She taught him from an early age that the only things he can count on in this world were himself and his gun. And to this day, he still carries around the .44 Magnum she gifted to him as a young boy. Perhaps purely due to its usefulness, or perhaps for the sake of memento. It's a known fact in psychology that children mirror the environment they grow up in, taking on traits of their parents, siblings, and surroundings, forming their unique sense of morality based on the example provided by those around them, especially those in positions of esteem. These environments play a massive factor in forming the adult they eventually become. The events of Conrad's upbringing left him guilt-ridden and traumatized, the guilt eventually leading him to running away from home, humiliated at the fact that he couldn't protect his mother from his alcoholic father. He covered up this trauma with the excuse that he simply wanted a better life for himself. A better life was not in his cards, however. Once out on his own, Conrad was easily able to adjust to the brutality of the wasteland, quickly finding work amongst the criminal underground and raider gangs that occupied the young NCR. Conrad's philosophy of independence inherited from his mother was only strengthened by his time with the dregs of the wasteland, the harsh lifestyle serving to toughen the man even further. But he wasn't quite the calculated mercenary we came to know yet, and often acted impulsively and recklessly. As he aged, however, he managed to develop a skill that not only helped him to survive in this dangerous world, but also allowed him to stand out amongst his peers. More than a ruthless savage, Conrad became an efficient and calculated mercenary, finding great success in completing highly dangerous contracts for high amounts of profit. Over the years, Conrad continued to hone this skill, gaining further renown in the seedy underbelly of society, with his reputation hitting its peak after he assassinated a man named Valdez. Perhaps this man was a highly guarded political figure, or perhaps he was another skilled mercenary competing with Conrad for contracts. Unfortunately, all we know is that the assassination of this man made Conrad famous, and his newly found fame soon paid off when he was contracted to work for the Shi as an enforcer, a contract to which he gladly accepted. The Shi are a massive faction that control the entirety of the San Francisco area. Because of this, they were able to pay well for consistent work that didn't incur the same amount of danger that Conrad had grown accustomed to when he was running with the raider gangs. At long last, after years of toil, Conrad had finally found the better life he was searching for. While his thoughts still lingered with the family he left behind, they would soon be replaced by the family he was about to start. On a night out in the hub, Conrad met a young woman by the name of Sarah, who he quickly became infatuated with. The feeling having been reciprocated led the two to pursuing a relationship, which blossomed to an eventual marriage. Afterwards, Sarah would move with Conrad to San Francisco, leaving behind her life in the hub to start anew with her husband. It wasn't long before Conrad and Sarah conceived a baby of their own, a little girl named Mary. And for a while, life was nice. Not perfect by any means, as Conrad still struggled with the trauma of his own upbringing. But he was determined to be better than his father and give his family the love and stability he never had. And he did well, for the most part. But all good things eventually come to an end. Some sooner than others, and certainly too soon for our dear friend. While Conrad's work for the Shi wasn't the most dangerous work he ever found himself in, it still brought with it plenty of danger. The only difference was that Conrad finally had a weakness: his family. It's unclear who it was that did in his wife and daughter, or why they did it to begin with, but one thing was crystal clear: whoever did so signed their own death warrant. Like a man possessed, Conrad embarked on a crusade to exact his vengeance in the most brutal ways imaginable, tracking down every individual who had a hand in the death of his family and dispatching them in a fury and bloodlust that had yet to be seen in the wasteland. As the smoke cleared, only a single silhouette was witnessed exiting. Vengeance had been his this day. Although his family was avenged, Conrad was left broken on the inside, the guilt over their deaths shattering him into fragments. How he wished he would have never met Sarah, so she wouldn't have suffered this horrendous fate. And Mary? Well, some pains are just too deep to be expressed. Dejected, Conrad returned home to find it abandoned, empty. The once vibrant house filled with giggles, cries, laughs, and lullabies now lie motionless and quiet. The pain of his loss having been too much to bear, he decided to pack up and head east, hoping to put the pain of his past, his mother, father, wife, and daughter, further behind him with every step. And with each new boot print in the terrain, Conrad changed, growing ever colder, detached, ruthless. On the road east, he had taken many jobs from those needing a good mercenary. However, something changed in him. His tactics were more savage, and he lacked any reservations in regards to the immorality of the job. It no longer mattered to him who his target was, be it man, woman, or youngling. Even though it bothered him deep down whenever he had to dispatch an individual who had yet to reach adulthood, it did not stop him. His cares lied only in caps. He continued on this destructive path for many years, leaving a trail of blood, tears, and broken hearts in his wake. They say war never changes. Men do. through the roads that they walk. And this road had finally reached its end. After 3,000 miles, he stood there, gazing out at the waves as they crashed on the beach, a sight which he had not seen in many years. And a new sight met his gaze this morning. The sun, which he had only ever seen set on the ocean, was rising on this one. It's as symbolic as it is beautiful. His old life is over, buried, forgotten. Just like the sun that dipped under the waves of the San Francisco Bay, it's gone. And his new life in the Commonwealth is just beginning. Turning his back on the sunrise, Kellogg made his way to a local settlement he passed on the way here, known to us as Diamond City. It was here that he would settle down, buying some property and continuing his mercenary work. After some time, Kellogg became privy to the region's local legend, the boogeyman that stalks the countryside, lurking around every corner, inside of every shadow. The work that Kellogg was doing had been disrupting the operations of the Institute, a group of subterranean scientists who pull the strings of the local power dynamics above ground. Once Kellogg was on their radar, they dispatched a proxy to locate and eliminate him. However, the Institute had grossly underestimated their target, and once confronted, the Institute proxy was dispatched with ease. It was then that Kellogg took it upon himself to send a return message. Shortly after this attack, he managed to track down the Institute's location and traveled to it, all on his own. The message was clear. The Institute had no choice but to arrange a meeting with Kellogg, a meeting that would go on to determine the fate of the entire Commonwealth. There he stood, face to face with phantoms, beings that haunted kids' nightmares and adult daydreams. Yet there he stood, unfazed by what stand before him, and unafraid. The meeting was short and sweet. Kellogg, recognizing the Institute could pay more for contracts than any of its competitors on the surface, put forth his offer. The Institute, not one to easily fall to intimidation tactics, set their synth guards on him. In a matter of seconds, Kellogg gained the upper hand and eliminated all 3 combat synths, proving his might to the scientist he was meeting with. The Institute conceded, and hired Kellogg on to act as their new lead surface operative, with his experience in the wasteland no doubt proving invaluable to them. His new position wasn't just that of assassin, however. He also acted as a liaison between the Institute and settlements they wished to make contact with, like in the case of University Point, a budding settlement with access to advanced knowledge and technology. When those settlements didn't comply with the Institute's demands, Kellogg would sometimes be placed in command of the strike teams responsible for wiping out said settlements, such as the one found in University Point, after they failed to produce the data on reactor efficiency that the Institute had demanded from them. It continued on like this for many years, with Kellogg proving himself ever the savage, again and again, until one day, a set of orders would come down the pipe. Orders that, if carried out, would irrevocably change the entirety of the Commonwealth forever, and Kellogg along with it. The orders were simple, a typical excursion and retrieval mission, the kind that Kellogg had done countless times. He was to lead a group of Institute scientists into the sealed Vault 111 and retrieve a young baby boy by the name of Sean. And so he did. Upon entering the vault, the science team had located the pod containing the baby and began the unthaw process immediately. Standing there, Kellogg's thoughts drifted to faded memories of the life he once had. How he had a family once, just like this. And when Sean's parent refused to give him up in their delirious haze, Kellogg was forced to brush these memories aside, as he had done many times in the past. In one swift move, he pulled the trigger on his .44, launching a round into the chest of the defenseless parent, ending them, and allowing the Institute to take custody of the young boy. Meanwhile, Sean's other parents stared on in abject horror from the seclusion of their own pod, unable to move, unable to stop the tragedy that unfolded before them. The scientists soon wrapped up and began their exit procedures, placing all other residents back into cryostasis. And as a means of tying up loose ends, the Institute scientists also disabled the life support for all the residents in the vaults. All but one, Sean's other parent, the backup. This made Kellogg very uneasy, as he recalled what that kind of pain does to a person, what it did to him. However, it was a moot point. He had a job to do, and he executed it to perfection. 60 years have passed from this event, and for Kellogg, things remained relatively unchanged. Some time ago, the Institute equipped him with advanced cybernetics to slow his aging and extend his lifespan. At over 100 years old, he is physically the same age he was when he arrived in the Commonwealth. A blessing and a curse. It was always unclear to him if his life was extended for the purpose of the events that soon follow, or if it was just unlucky happenstance. Either way, Kellogg found himself in a position he should have seen coming. In the years since Sean was taken from Vault 111, the baby has since grown up and ascended to the position of head scientist in the Institute, where he is now known as Father. Father's life work revolved around the creation and perfection of Generation 3 synths, which are largely biological in design as opposed to their more mechanical Generation 1 and 2 predecessors. Perhaps it was because his own DNA was used to synthesize the genome for these beings, or perhaps because it was simply a field of study he found interesting. Either way, Father would come to develop a synth of his very own, himself, albeit as a 10-year-old boy. While the logic of studying the emotional reaction of younger synths is clear and sound, his motives for creating himself as a child synth and forcing it to live with Kellogg in Diamond City have a more sinister implication. Whether it's because Father wanted vengeance for the death of his parent, or simply because he didn't like the man is irrelevant, as the result remained the same. Kellogg was now the perfect bait for the sole survivor, who Father would soon release from Vault 111, and who would begin on the warpath, seeking retribution for what Kellogg did to their family. For some time, life was calm for Kellogg. Playing house with the synth child wasn't exactly his idea of a good time, but it reminded him of something, a feeling that had long been forgotten to this grizzled mercenary. Perhaps this is what it would have been like had he not lost his family. Perhaps life would have been much different, better, or perhaps not. His thoughts dwell on a past that he would much rather forget, for that part of his life was truly over. There is no going back. For one reason or another that he was not privy to, Father's plans for him changed. On a cold Commonwealth morning, as Kellogg was servicing his old 44, an Institute courser by the designation X688 arrived at his home in Diamond City to collect the synth child and return him to the Institute. This courser brought with it a file of an escaped Institute scientist by the name of Virgil that Kellogg was tasked with tracking down and eliminating. The contract would not be an easy one, even for this highly trained mercenary, as Virgil was hiding in the treacherous glowing sea, an area that was directly hit by a nuclear bomb during the Great War, riddling the grounds with hyper-lethal levels of radiation, and mutating every animal for miles into extremely deadly abominations. Kellogg took the contract, of course. What other options did he have, really? And quickly set out to establish a forward operating base in the ruins of Fort Hagen, an old military base from before the Great War, and conveniently located just north of the glowing sea. Whether by pure happenstance or carefully crafted design, Kellogg would find himself engaged in many battles on the road to Fort Hagen, leaving behind a very literal trail of blood. A trail which was carefully traversed by the sole survivor, who was hot on Kellogg's heels. Laid up in Fort Hagen due to his injuries from the aforementioned conflicts, Kellogg found himself in a situation he was all too familiar with. Thoughts of his own vengeful tirade played in his mind as he watched the sole survivor cleave their way through his synth guards, coming ever closer to him. An echo resonates as he taunts the survivor, just as the men who killed his family taunted him. It might have been this realization, or a latent sympathy for his enemy's situation, but Kellogg decided to talk to the survivor, tell them the truth about Sean, within reason that is. Of course, this did little to quell the rage within the sole survivor's heart, as seeing Kellogg's face brought the tragedy he caused them back to the surface. And now, the final echo in Kellogg's long life would resonate. Shots rang out as Kellogg activated his stealth boy, 44 in hand, ready to take the fight to his aggressor, just as he had done countless times before. Something was different about this time though. He was slower, sluggish, his aim was off. Was it the injuries? Or had the years finally caught up with him? Taking cover, Kellogg engaged the sole survivor in a fierce shootout. The survivor quickly dispatching Kellogg's remaining synth guards only had him to worry about now. Time in this place seemed to slow, as each party took their shots, again and again, with neither budging an inch. But all things must come to an end, and for one man, his time was up. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, Kellogg lay on the ground, riddled with bullet holes. This was it. He knew it. His final thoughts dwell with Sarah and Mary as the darkness closed in around him, engulfing him in the shroud of the Reaper. Wait, something was wrong. He was awake still in this eternal darkness, unable to rest. And in a flash of light not unlike that at the end of a tunnel, his memories began to play before him like an old film, broken, disjointed. In all of these memories stands a familiar figure, a figure that wasn't there when the memories were formed, a figure he recognized all too well, the sole survivor. A realization dawned on him in that exact moment. He was not dead, not truly, that is. Whatever the Institute did to augment him didn't just extend his life, it made him immortal in a manner of speaking. His consciousness still existed in this piece of technology, transferred into some digital form. And when the sole survivor was done accessing his memories, Kellogg found himself inhabiting a new body, not flesh and blood like his previous, but mechanical, made of nuts and bolts, the very components that made up his companions over the last 60 years. Sadly for Kellogg, the body he inhabited already had a personality of its own, and that town wasn't big enough for the two of them. He was unsure of what would happen once he relinquished control, whether he would still exist in the back of the synth processor, or whether he would fade away, his consciousness just an echo in this body, where the real Kellogg was well and truly dead. But when he saw that all too familiar face turn the corner, he couldn't help but find the humor in his situation, and realize that whatever his fate, there was no use holding on. Delivering one last final taunt to the sole survivor, Kellogg slipped away, never to be heard from again. Thank you so much for watching. Kellogg always seemed like a more tragic character than many in the Fallout community give him credit for. Yes, he's an antagonist, but he's written with enough depth and ambiguity that it's hard to not sympathize with the man despite all the morally questionable acts he's committed, especially by the end of his life. Speaking of which, I'm interested to hear your theories. Do you think Kellogg's consciousness still resides in Nick Valentine somewhere, seeing through his eyes without being able to control his actions, like in the movie Get Out? Or do you think he truly just faded away? A piece of lingering code that was discarded like Dima discards his memories? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you can be part of our wonderful community. Lastly, if you want to support the channel further, feel free to leave me a super chat, become a channel member, or pick up a unique piece of merchandise from the TheNeoCypher store. You can also share pictures of you and your new merch with me on Instagram. I would love to see them. Links will be in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and until we meet next, Wale Amicus.